In this lesson, we will introduce the 21 CLD Use of ICT for Learning rubric and decision tree. These capture the big ideas of use of ICT for learning, and they are a useful framework when designing learning activities to develop students' use of ICT for learning skills. The 21 CLD Use of ICT for Learning rubric examines how students use ICT, and whether it is used in more powerful ways to construct knowledge or to design knowledge-based products. In stronger activities, the use of ICT is required to support knowledge construction. In the strongest activities, students are designers of ICT products when they create ICT products that others can use. We can capture the big ideas of ICT for learning by using a decision tree. A decision tree is a visual way of representing the big ideas in ICT for learning. It is designed as a number of questions. As you can see, there are 4 questions in the Use of ICT for Learning decision tree. The first relates to whether the students have the opportunity to use ICT in the learning activity. The second is to determine if ICT supports students' knowledge construction. The third question asks if ICT is required for constructing this knowledge. The fourth question asks if the students are designers of an ICT product. The power of using a decision tree is that it provides a framework for designing learning activities and, in this case, examining opportunities for the use of ICT for learning. Considering each of these questions is useful when designing a learning activity with the use of ICT for learning in mind. For example, there are times when students will have the opportunity to use ICT for the learning activity. Sometimes the students will be using ICT to learn or practice basic skills or reproduce information. At other times, they will be using ICT to support their knowledge construction. On occasion, the students could construct the same knowledge without using ICT, but on other occasions the ICT is required for constructing this knowledge. There will be other times when students will be designers and create an ICT product for authentic users. It all depends on the planned learning outcomes and the needs of your students. Not all learning activities will have each of the levels, but over the period of a year, for example, you should look to include learning activities at all of the levels. You need to bear in mind, as you look at the decision tree, that the numbering system is a code, not a score. For example, code 1 merely indicates that there is some use of ICT included in the activity. It is not a value judgment about the quality of the learning activity. We can capture all of these ideas by using the Use of ICT for Learning decision tree. There are 4 questions in the Use of ICT for Learning decision tree. The first relates to whether the students have the opportunity to use ICT in the learning activity. The second is to determine if ICT supports students' knowledge construction. The third question asks if ICT is required for constructing this knowledge. The fourth question asks if the students are designers of an ICT product. Considering each of these questions is useful when designing a learning activity with the use of ICT for learning in mind. As with the other 21 CLD dimensions, remember, as you look at the decision tree, that the numbering system is a code, not a score. For example, a code 1 merely indicates that there is some use of ICT included in the activity. So let's look at the use of ICT for learning decision tree. The first question asks if the students have the opportunity to use ICT in the learning activity. If the answer to this question is no, then the learning activity is coded as a 1. In this case, students do not have the opportunity to use ICT for this learning activity. This is an example of a learning activity that can be coded as a 1.
Now, when you open it the first time, it will tell you a little bit about M8 and then it will give you an option to start your own mind map. How would you start your own mind map, do you think? Or, now there are ones I've done already, what would you do? Plus. Excellent.
I said palm apart.
Okay, Charlie.
The big square up by the red lion up.
Ah, village square, good thinking.
Yeah, with the red lion.
Village square, and sometimes that's called a village green as well.
You mentioned another one there, Charlie, as well. You said it's by the... What did you say it was by?
The red lion.
Ah, red line, we don't have that either.
I would say that's a feature.
Yes, please.
The doctors.
Doctors.
If I ask if the students have the opportunity to use ICT in the learning activity, and the answer to this question is yes, then I ask myself, does ICT support students' knowledge construction? If the answer is no to this question, the learning activity is coded at a 2. In other words, students use ICT to learn or practice basic skills or reproduce information. They are not constructing knowledge. This is an example of a learning activity that can be coded as a 2.
Ne hengittää.
Tuossa on hai.
Onko se sellä vai ihmisellä?
If I ask if the students have the opportunity to use ICT in the learning activity, and the answer to this question is yes, then I ask myself, does ICT support students' knowledge construction? If the answer is yes, then I ask if ICT is required for constructing this knowledge. If the answer is no, then the learning activity is coded as a 3. In other words, students use ICT to support knowledge construction, but they could construct the same knowledge without using ICT. This is an example of a learning activity that can be coded as a 3.
I said, yeah, tips for writing a good song, which will help her, and the topic, of course, and also the problem.
Okay, so what was the problem now again that we need to solve?
The problem is like people finding it hard to find their identity. And yeah.
And the reason for the song?
To express your feelings and to portray a message to society through lyrics.
Okay, fine.
When I ask if ICT is required for constructing this knowledge and the answer is yes, then I ask if the students are designers of an ICT product. If the answer is no, then the learning activity is coded as a 4. In other words, students use ICT to support knowledge construction, and the ICT is required for constructing this knowledge. But students do not create an ICT product for authentic users. This is an example of a learning activity that can be coded as a 4.
Ne hengittää.
Kuussa hoi.
However, if the answer is yes to the question, are students designers of an ICT product, then the learning activity is coded as a 5. In other words, students use ICT to support knowledge construction, and the ICT is required for constructing this knowledge, and students do create an ICT product for authentic users. This is an example of a learning activity that can be coded as a 5.
We screenshotted it and then we got it on, and then we are going to be we have wrote beside it what it means, like what is happening on this screen clip.
And how might that be useful?
So then the teachers who want to use this know what's happening and know how to do it if they ever want to make their own game.
So is it like an instruction manual?
Where we interview people and ask their opinions and ask them how they think we can change.
And it's also very light-hearted, and I think that we use like a very comedic effect to portray our message. Like we make people laugh, and we also like still make them think about what's going on.
Yeah, I think when you watch the video, you watch and it's funny and you laugh, and then afterwards you realize, okay, wait, there's actually a message here.
You can use all your information you have with pictures and incorporate it in one thing with videos and links and stuff. So everything is together to have all your solutions in one. So then the question was, how can we guide ourselves and other teenagers to find and share our authentic voice to build a positive society? And then I said, what is a hard song? And then what is our authentic voice? And then how to find it. And then what is your identity? Who am I? What is heritage? And then I had videos on YouTube that explains who am I. And then I decided to have real-life problems for teenagers in South Africa, which is xenophobia, bullying, suicide, technology, and poverty. And then with each of them, I had an article on the internet which explains what it is and what the consequences is for all these problems. And then I had solutions for these 5 stuff. And then I decided to have 10 steps to build it up rather than to destroy, with more videos for other people explaining that.
The feedback you got, did you get some feedback that made you do some changes?
Yeah, there was a piece of feedback, but we weren't able to change it. It was the fact that the first level is quite slow. We weren't able to change that because when we tried to make the computer quicker and our people quicker, the computer people started spinning around, and then we kept on trying to change it and it just wouldn't work. So we weren't able to make it quicker.
So you had to make a decision based on feedback.
Not all use of ICT for learning activities will have each of the levels. Over time, you should aim to include learning activities at all of the levels. The first thing to consider in designing learning activities for use of ICT for learning is that the ICT use supports the construction of knowledge. This involves using ICT tools to generate ideas and understandings that are new to them through interpretation, analysis, synthesis, or evaluation. You can consider including knowledge construction activities that would be impossible or impractical without the use of ICT. Thus, ICT is required for the knowledge construction. You can consider creating opportunities for students to create an ICT product that others can use so that they are designers of an ICT product. In doing this, you also need to consider how much opportunity you want to provide your students to use ICT for learning. As with the other 21 CLD dimensions, you need to bear in mind, as you look at the decision tree, that the numbering system is a code, not a score. For example, a code 2 merely indicates that students are using ICT to learn or practice basic skills or reproduce information. This decision tree can also be represented as a rubric. As you can see, each of the numbers, 1 to 5, outline the criteria for the condition for the code. For example, to achieve a code 3, students use ICT to support knowledge construction, but they could construct the same knowledge without using ICT. You can decide which you find easier to use, the decision tree or the rubric, when designing your learning activities. In this lesson, we have discussed the use of ICT for learning, rubric and decision tree. In the next lesson, we will develop these ideas further by examining some 21 CLD anchor lessons for evidence of ICT use for learning.